career path for you. Are any other ideas coming to mind? Feel free to put it in the chat box if anyone else has any other takes. And Meredith, can you think of anything else that makes this that makes a career international? Anything else that you would use to define it?
I think that covers a lot of perspectives. I think that a lot of what we will sometimes hear is the misconception, just as you addressed, that you have to be abroad in order to work in an international environment. So I think it's wonderful to address that, and that it's more about those that you work with and are interacting with through the day-to-day work rather than necessarily just your location.
Great. And I guess something I would even add to this that I missed is something that did require you to academically study, you know, things that that are international. Did you have to study the culture of a foreign country? Did you have to study another region of the world to really become fluent in the culture and society and economics of that place in order to do your job, even if it's a few blocks from where you grew up? Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So I wanted to offer you a few different perspectives in terms of international career sectors. So nonprofit and organizational is one, and that happens to be the one that I can speak from in my current role. The other is government. The third is institutional, and the fourth is nonprofit. So we'll go to the organizational first because that's what I am currently more of an expert on, I'd say. So the program development is what I happen to do in an international organization. Cultural Vistas is a State Department sponsor of J1 visas. So a J1 visa is a visa that brings people here to do professional training and professional development. So people can do internships or training. It's different than the visas that people come to the U.S. to study on, which is usually an S visa. So we are designated by the State Department to offer these visas and sponsor people to come over, but we also do outbound programming as well. We have an internships abroad a department that works on getting undergrads and graduate students and recent graduates abroad. We have some STEM-focused programs. I specifically work in a lot of programming that brings people to the States for short periods of time, so not necessarily long internships or traineeships, but they come to the States to, you know, do a study tour, visiting organizations or companies that do the work that these people do in their home countries. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But a big part of my job is seeking funding, so writing grants, networking with potential funders and organizations and for-profit sector clients that want us to create programs for their employees or want us to do international recruiting so that they can diversify their own employee base. Our work is mission-driven, and in most cases, different nonprofit organizations are all mission-driven. For us, our mission at Cultural Vistas is to help to create a globally skilled workforce. And so that's why most of our programming obviously is professional in nature, or we try to, even if it's more educational or more, or even if it's virtual exchange programming, we always try to include some sort of professional development opportunities, resume building, things like that for our participants. The growing sectors within organizations these days are in project management, so that's a big part of what I do. I manage multiple projects at a time, inbound, outbound, small programs of about 10 people coming here to the States for, you know, only 5 days, and then large programs of people like the one I'm running in March of 50 participants coming here for about 2 weeks and going to different cities. So, you know, different scales of projects. There's also technology and IT services. Everything is online these days, so having the ability in an organization to make sure that you have that a strong online presence, strong website, that your technology works, that you have internal mechanisms for applications and things like that. accounting, event planning, communications and marketing, all of these are really important pieces of the puzzle of successful organizations. They're all things that, as you could probably guess, require really, really different skill sets. And so you may find that you fit naturally into one of these sectors within organizations, but you may find that you have to sort of challenge yourself to find your fit. But I think across the board, you know, these show that you can enter an organization, an international organization, from a lot of different backgrounds. So just keep that in mind. And I've also tried to list best places to look for different organizations, or different positions, rather, at organizations that are available. Usually going to organizational websites is really the best way to do it, but obviously Idealist and a couple of other places are also good for looking. And I've listed a few of them on other slides as well, monster.com, Career Builder, things like that. I will say most of my positions within what I've done have been mostly through people I know and I've networked with, so I've been very fortunate in that regard, but it just sort of attests to the strength of your network and making sure that you build that up throughout your career and your studies. We can go to the next slide. So the trends right now, and this is something that I think can be a challenge with any sort of internationally oriented work, is kind of keeping up with the trends and knowing where funding and therefore jobs are going to appear next. So right now, there's a huge focus for organizations that do the work like Cultural Vistas on Southeast Asia, on Africa, and the Middle East. These are strategically places in terms of if you want to work in the U.S., there's a lot more governmental and for-profit funding available. So these are places that I would definitely read up on. There's an interesting disconnect, obviously, in that most students study abroad in Europe, but these are not the places, for example, currently, for my organization, we are always looking for people who have had experience in Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, or maybe not always, but in the past few years, that's definitely been a focus. It's a real strength that people can speak languages from those regions of the world, or just at least have some sort of a working knowledge of the politics and culture and economics of those regions. Demographics of the people that organizations like Cultural Vistas are trying to get on programs or trying to recruit to work for them. Younger people, you know, people in K through 12, trying to get them involved in some way in international programming, as well as professionals. It's relatively easy, and I say that with quotes around it, for people in college to go abroad. And again, I don't say it that it is easy for sure, but I say it because there are study abroad offices and career development offices and usually different kinds of student services at universities and even in community colleges in some cases that can help students with advising for international programming and helping them learn about their options. And that's a little bit less true in K through 12. And then as you get into your career, it's a lot harder to go abroad. And as people get older, just because of the nature of life, you know, if people buy houses or settle down or, you know, have pets, things like that require them to really plan much more carefully what they can do for 6 months or so. It's a little bit more challenging than it is to leave campus for a semester. So that's definitely a focus of my organization, but also other organizations that are trying to get non-traditional people not only abroad, but also involved in the work that they're doing. STEM, vocational fields, general education, civic engagement, these are all growing sectors for international programming. And I would say short-term exchanges, but also experiential work abroad kinds of programs are huge right now. More and more study abroad program providers, which I consider organizations, so like CIEE and SIT and all those other acronyms I'm sure some of you have heard batted around at study abroad fairs and things. They're all trying to offer more experiential opportunities for students. And in the same vein, we at organizations like Cultural Vistas are trying to really focus on those opportunities and get more of them going. So if you're interested in those opportunities but also interested in taking it a step further and working to try to offer those opportunities, that's one way for sure that you would have an in with an international organization. We can go to the next slide. So the governmental perspective, working in government in international sectors, international jobs, is another very promising way to internationalize your career. It isn't always the easiest way. It is something that typically for people comes a little bit later in their careers in terms of, having had a sort of established resume and established experience in different parts of the world. For work in the governmental sector that's international, the focus is on addressing common and shared challenges between, and I'm speaking specifically from the U.S. and other parts of the world, but I'm sure this is true if you are interested in getting into government in other parts of the world as well. The importance of collaboration between the U.S. and other countries, and demonstrating the power of exchange and international engagement. And I'll tell you one way that the U.S. government funds international work and the type of work that I actually do. Each embassy in different parts of the world has sort of a pot of funds that they can use to do programming that's based on a theme that they see as a very contemporary issue or challenge in that country where the embassy is located. So for example, we've gotten funding from the U.S. Embassy in London to do a fair amount of work creating exchange programs for Muslim leaders from the UK to come to the U.S. and learn about multiculturalism and learn about Islam in the U.S. and sort of come together with leaders in the U.S., Muslim leaders, and figure out, ways that they can engage in cross-Atlantic dialogue, transatlantic dialogue about how to improve the relationships in those countries between the Muslim populations and the government. So it's a really interesting program. We've done it for a couple of years, and it is something that is just a good example of how an embassy abroad has decided to use its money. And all of those embassies obviously hire people. They typically hire people that are in the foreign service, but there are lots of different jobs at the embassies. And again, going back to the slide with the growing sectors within organizations, a lot of that applies to the government as well. The government is hiring social media strategists and accounting people and, all the people that they need to pull together to make these sorts of international programs work. So I would keep in mind, that again, you don't have to be an international relations major to engage in this. There are a gazillion jobs at Department of State in D.C. that require international knowledge, and yes, you would be mostly working domestically, but you get to meet people from all around the world, you get to engage with colleagues all around the world, you get to learn about different issues and different strategic paths that the U.S. government is taking to better understand different parts of the world. So I think even though technically many of those jobs are located here, they're really, really dynamic and very interesting learning opportunities. And you can go on to the next slide. And again, just to list some trends, a lot of these overlap with the work that I do, but as I mentioned, the regional interests, Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, Middle East, Russia right now, these are all places that the government is funding a lot of work with and is creating a lot of jobs for people who have experience in these regions of the world. These are not always the easiest places to actually physically go and even study abroad. So for many of the kinds of positions I know that the government's hiring for, again, they're looking more at skill sets and less at actually where people have gone. Or maybe they're looking at what people are studying rather than where you studied abroad or interned abroad or anything like that. So if you are, you speak a little Arabic and you know about foreign policy with the Middle East, but maybe you haven't been there, you still have sort of an in. And so make sure that you capitalize on things like that. There's big emphasis on diversity, involving different people from different backgrounds in the work of the government, making sure that underrepresented populations are included in the hiring process and that their perspectives are taken into account. responding to contemporary challenges like global warming, all of the different things going on with migration right now from the Middle East into Europe and also here in the States. I'm currently working on a program that's going to bring German professionals here to the States in April, 25 German professionals that are working in Germany in different cities to include migrant populations in the civic process and welcome them and acclimate them. And they'll be meeting with people in different cities around the U.S. that do the same thing. And then the Americans are actually going over there to Germany in the fall to learn and see sort of firsthand how Germany is dealing with the influx of migrants and how it's going. And so this is a program that is involving people from Department of State, it's involving people from the German government, it's involving people from the EU, and thinking about not only my job, but the kinds of jobs that they do and the backgrounds that they have. It's very much something that, you know, you could get into. That's a very international career. And then the best places to look for jobs, usajobs.gov, federal government jobs, Indeed.com, and then state.gov. I will not say that the government hiring process is the easiest. There are often background checks and things like that. But, you know, if you have the experience, I know that sometimes that can sort of speed up the process for you. So just keep that in mind. And the government, by the way, the state.gov and a couple of other, or state.gov, the State Department and a couple of other departments in DC are always hiring interns, particularly during the summer. And so if you get an internship, a federal internship, you are gold in terms of applying to federal positions in the future and after college. Just keep that in mind. And we can go on to the next slide. So institutional perspectives, I can also speak a little bit to this, having worked at both a large public institution and a small private institution, organizing international exchange programs. So I worked at the University of Maryland when Maryland was really scaling up its initiative to make study abroad a reality for more of its students. When I first started there, it was a 4-person office. We were in the attic of an administrative building on campus, and nobody could ever find us. At that time, Maryland had lots of international students coming, but didn't have as many students going out. And so that was a big challenge for the university. And in the 3 years I was there, they ended up scaling up to about 12 people in the office, and they really grew those efforts. They had a lot of support and advocacy from the dean and the provost and the president and other offices on campus. So I ended up working in study abroad, and I was lucky that a story actually got me my job there. I told a funny story about being in South Africa and having to use an outhouse that was in part being used to fence in sort of their hog pen, my host family, and just how interesting an experience that was. And I was told like a few months later that because I made everybody laugh and because I made sort of that intercultural connection and talked about that as a challenge for myself, but one that I grew from, that helped me get the position there. And so I think, you know, it's fair to say when you're applying at institutions, a lot of schools are really interested in your character and your ability to relate to students. And this is if you're applying specifically to work with either international students or study abroad students. There's so many other ways that you could get into working at institutions that may or may not overtly be international, but will probably at some point in time allow you to work with some of the international offices on campus, work with international students. So, you know, admissions offices are always hiring people that might be interested in international student recruitment, international student services, so actually serving the students that are coming to an institution, career advising. I'm sure Meredith does a fair amount of talking about international opportunities with students. The registrar's office, financial aid, communications. There are just so many ways on an institution and on a campus to get involved in international initiatives. And so I think that that is one of the coolest places if you can get in. What I will say is that the sector for specifically education abroad and international student services has gotten a lot more competitive over the years. And so I would say any way that you could sort of get into an institution but be creative about any international opportunities there would benefit you. And I'm just speaking from my experience working in a study abroad office, but obviously, you know, there's probably ways for you to get involved with language clubs, with advising a student group on campus, no matter what your capacity is at the university or the college. So be really, you know, mindful of that and think creatively. Don't think that just, you know, if you end up getting sort of an administrative, entry-level administrative job in an office, in the billing office, for example, that you're cut off from international work. It will take a little bit of your own resources and time to think about that and how you could internationalize your path there, but it is there, and in an institutional setting, it's usually much more easy to make those connections. And I included a picture. This is an opportunity I had while I was at Goucher, actually, to co-lead one of the study abroad programs to South Africa with Janet Shope. I had actually gone to South Africa on the program that she ran with Eric Singer a couple of years, okay, more than a couple of years, about 10 years or so maybe prior to when I actually went with the students, and it was a wonderful experience getting to revisit that as an experienced international education professional and just watch the students' development and watch my own development and think back on what I learned from my initial experiences there. So yeah, making those connections in an institutional setting is really important. Best places to look for jobs, higheredjobs.com is a huge site for that. And you can use keywords to look up international, or even if you have a specific interest in a region or what you would want to do on a campus, you can, they have a lot of filters you can use, and it's really helpful. NAFSA has a job registry. NAFSA used to stand for the National Association of Foreign Student Advisors, but it's now just sort of an acronym that means the Association of International Educators. The Forum for Education Abroad also has a job registry, and again, more ed abroad and international student advising oriented, but really helpful. And then a university website specifically, you know, if you know where you're moving and there's a large public or a small private or whatever kind of institution there, go on their job site and see if they're hiring for anything. We can go on to the next slide. So in the for-profit sector, this is a place I haven't worked specifically, but I work with people in the for-profit sector quite a bit in terms of doing funded programs and project management. And so the trends, I would say, are global supply chain management, doing work as a subcontractor for federal international grants. We often hire, you know, travel agencies and other kinds of for-profit businesses to help us with programming. Security, international security and security training. IT, global mobility, which means people moving all over the world. A lot of the larger companies, like let's say Hewlett-Packard, I had a friend who was working in global mobility, so when someone would be reassigned to an office in Brazil or an office in Germany, she would help them get settled in that new country. She would do research about schools for their kids or help them figure out where to live and provide advising like that. So that's a big, big sector and a very well-paid sector, I will say. Travel logistics, event planning, these are all things that, again, people from many, many different skill sets could come in and work in these sort of subsectors of the for-profit sector. Best places to look for jobs in the for-profit sector, monster.com, different company websites specifically, and then a couple of resources that I've included at the end of this presentation that I'll show you. Next slide, please. So marketing yourself. This is the biggest piece, and hopefully the place that will start to generate the most conversation amongst you all. Think of stories, you know, think of stories that you could use that have some sort of an international connotation or a funny intercultural situation or scenario, things like that, and help working with the career development office or working with a career mentor to make your stories sellable. So like I said, I told a story about the challenges of being in a homestay in a rural area in South Africa and having to use an outhouse, and sort of made that into a teachable moment for myself. And I had no idea that that would possibly help to land me a position. And so I think it's important to reflect on your experiences. And again, I say here, what is your story from abroad? But it could be something that happened here too. It could be something that happened in your hometown or something that happened on campus. Anything that sort of gets at coping, life skills, intercultural communication, things like that. Vice versa, if you're applying for a job that doesn't really have too much of an international component to it, but you're interested in possibly incorporating one eventually, this is also a place for you to just kind of give that scenario of something that was international in nature and let people know that you are interested in anything international. Shooting for the sidewalk and not the stars, I am sometimes shocked at what people that I'm working with that are in college, students from the U.S. and other places in the world, think they are entitled to be right out of college. I think it's important to look very specifically at job requirements as they're listed on a website. If it says 5 to 7 years experience and you are just graduating from college, maybe that's not exactly the right fit. However, in a few years, if you were working in the right position and you were increasingly responsible for different kinds of things, that would possibly be an option for you. So really getting in is half the battle, and again, making those connections yourself, whether you're working in an organization or on a campus, something like that. These are really important things. And so getting in, just shooting for the sidewalk, something that you can build up to, you know, a 15-story building is, I think, a really good thing. And then making sure that you're paying attention to other kinds of maybe not so obvious opportunities, internships, assistantships if you're thinking about grad school, and then towards the bottom of the slide I'm listing fellowships and grants and domestic opportunities, volunteering with the International Rescue Committee to be a family mentor, or connecting with international organizations in your city or wherever you end up after college, you know, to see if they have international events going on or networking events and things like that. These are all ways for you to kind of get out there and think outside of the box. Your job title doesn't have to have international in it for you to continue to grow professionally in an international context. So just keep that in mind. Okay, next slide. The MacGyvering your own international path approach. This is something I'm a huge fan of, and I'm lucky that I've been able to work in different sectors that have allowed me to see the benefits of these paths for other people, as well as having taken one myself, sort of. So considering postgraduate academic and experiential opportunities can really, really change your career path, the connections you can make, things like that. Some of these require a little bit of sacrifice. You know, signing up to go somewhere that you're not exactly sure of the town you're going to end up in, or the home state situation you're going to end up in, or if you're going to be teaching, you know, what kind of a school or what kind of students you're going to end up in. These are all, I think, really important things. Again, so much of being in an internationally oriented career is the unknown, right? I don't know what's going to happen in the world tomorrow, so I can never guess what skills I'm necessarily going to need, but I can try to equip myself. And I think that these kinds of opportunities, CBYX and Fulbright, CBYX is the Congress Bundestag Youth Exchange, and other kinds of programs, these opportunities prepare you for that unknown and make you so much more flexible, which is a really important part of people that I look for when I'm hiring. If you want to go to graduate school, I would look into ways that you can incorporate international research and study no matter what you're studying, be it engineering, be it medical, be it business, any way that you can incorporate anything international, or take opportunities when you're doing projects or independent studies to do something international. When I was at Maryland in graduate school, I actually decided I wanted to go to a language school in Mexico for a couple weeks and learn some Spanish. But I talked to my advisors, and I was interested in learning about the structure of a language school and how it's set up and how they're accredited and how they operate as businesses and who's coming to them. And so I ended up getting independent study credit for my experience there, and also got a small travel grant from my university to do that. So it was really selfish endeavor, but it paid off, and I got the credits, and I did learn a ton, more than I would have learned if I just went there to actually take the language. So that was a really cool opportunity that I sort of like figured out how to make work for me. Volunteering at international conferences, even thinking about going to graduate school internationally, it's often much less expensive. There are a lot of places, Germany, for example, Australia, where the tuition is just very, very minimal, and that you can get a job and work or get an assistantship and actually get some sort of a living stipend to go to. So I would definitely think about that and encourage you in that way. And then even if you you know, or again, are studying something that's not internationally oriented, naturally, you do get that international take on whatever that subject is while you're abroad. And then, again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of networking. You know, keep in touch with people that you meet abroad. Keep in touch with people that you know are doing something international. If you end up, you know, wherever you end up after college, whether it's back home, whether it's still in Baltimore, whether you move somewhere else in the States, find the National Council for International Visitors in those cities or in that region. For example, Baltimore's is the World Trade Center downtown. Most of those organizations are often welcoming visitors through programs like the ones that I run, and they're always seeking people for hospitality, you know, to host a visitor or two in your home for dinner, to meet up with people out for a social occasion or something like that. Those are really important places that you could get that international flair in your life, even if your job is not, again, internationally oriented very naturally. And then volunteering, like I said, at the IRC or at other organizations can really help your career trajectory. So that was, for me, all I had. The next slide is just asking for questions. So what would people like to ask?
If anybody wants to raise their hand with questions or send them via chat, I can unmute you so that you can ask Angela yourself. I'll give you a couple of minutes to see if anybody has any questions.
And I know I didn't really go over too specifically other kinds of opportunities like the JET program, which is teaching English in Japan, or Peace Corps, because I know Peace Corps did another session for you all, right, Meredith?
Yes.
Okay.
They did. But we're marketing out other webinars that the Peace Corps is doing on their own through our social media. So if you follow the Career Development Office on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, you'll see links to those various webinars, or our recruiter also hosts kind of open hours online to answer questions and things like that as well. I'm not seeing any. Oh, wait. I do have one question that just came through from Hazel. So Hazel's asking, is going to grad school important for an international career?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking that, Hazel. I would say, and this is just me, I'm not speaking for my many millions of colleagues that work in the international sector. I would say that I look more for people who have taken a break and done work that either led them to the grad school path that they decided to take. Now, that work can be either completely unrelated and they hated it and they thought they would like it and they just decided they needed to go to grad school to further pursue something that actually was of interest to them, or it could be something that actually they realized they were really interested in, and then they went to grad school to further pursue that, and then their studies were actually more relevant to what they wanted to do professionally. I have had a number of interviews recently with people who went to grad school immediately following undergrad, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But what I have recognized is that they may not be fully aware of some of the challenges of the work specifically that I do if they haven't actually had experiential opportunities to do that work. And so even if people do end up going directly to grad school, I want to see the work experience. I want to see, you know, I want their, when I ask the question of what's your strength and what's your challenge, I want to hear a professionally relevant challenge, a professionally relevant strength, not, you know, it's really annoying to do group work in grad school and in undergrad, and I had a hard time with it. So I know that while a lot of positions do require master's degrees, and it can be from various sectors, or I guess various academic disciplines rather, I am also noticing that more and more organizations are including as well 2 to 3 years of professional experience because more students are going to grad school right after undergrad now. So I would say it is, or it can be important, but that for me, because so much of what I do is project management based and I need people who can really get in there and, you know how to manage a budget as much as they know what's going on politically with the Middle East, I think those things are important. So that's just my take on it. It is important, but work experience is just as important.
Does anybody have any follow-up questions?
And I have included, if you want to flip to the next, I think, slide, Meredith, I've included a couple of resources here with Careers International, goingglobal.com, which not only has jobs, but also has resources like how to review and redesign your resume based on the job you're applying to, and how to sort of promote your international experiences, maybe over some other things on your resume. Overseasjobs.com also has some good articles and resources about international work. Internationaljobs.org has a lot of internationally oriented job listings, and many of these are for-profit sector, but they also put DOS, Department of State, and other kinds of jobs there too. So I would take a look at those resources if you're interested in sort of getting a take on what's out there in terms of international sector careers.
And we do have the Going Global resource on the CDO website. So if anybody wants to visit www.goucher.edu/CDO, on the very front page you'll see a logo for Going Global, and it will get you to that resource. All right, Angie, I think that's it for today.
Well, thank you all so much for taking time. Hopefully everybody got a bite for lunch while we were chatting, and I appreciate it. I'll be on campus next week. Remind me, Meredith, it's Thursday, right?
Yeah. Thursday night for our Grow Your Network, Speed Networking event. So actually, to follow up on that, I do have this, just this information to remind any current students who are on the call that we do have Career Week next week starting on Monday. There are various events throughout the week. Alums as well are welcome to attend as participants. And we also have the MCC Career Fair at the end of the week on Friday as part of that, as part of Career Week. That event is the largest career fair in the region with over 150 employers in attendance and who are actively hiring for interns as well as full-time employment. So hopefully we will see all of you at something during Career Week. Again, you can always reach the Career Development Office if you need any assistance or would like to come in, follow up on questions that you asked of Angie and the responses that she provided, as well as teaching you how to get in touch with her and other career mentors through our alumni career coach system in Goucher Recruit. So thank you everyone for joining us for today. I hope that you learned a lot of great information, and we will see you for the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Angie.